So I'm going to go for Kerry first because she's the youngest one here. And I'm very pleased to have a young person. Kerry.
Obviously, we all know the really good things about Europe and the EU brings to us, but in the media, obviously, we only ever hear negative things about the EU, so I wanted to, obviously, you've all said all the brilliant things you want to do if you were elected, but unless we all convey how brilliant the EU is, how can you expect to be elected? So I want to know how you'll make everyone feel the same way about the EU that we do.
But there is a lot of negative hype when it comes to the EU, especially with what the media does. And I think the way forward is, and what I would be doing, is actually make it my job to work with local parties, because this region is vast. 6 million people live here. There is no way I'm going to be able to talk to, you know, the 13,000 Labour members, let alone the 6 million people of the east of England. And what we all have to do, activists, non-activists and the like, Labour Party members, is to get out there and start talking to the voters and telling them about the good things that the EU does for us. So things like workers' rights, maternity rights, paternity rights, paid leave, consumer rights, welfare, you know, the right to extradite criminals that are in Europe. There's loads of different things that the EU actually brings us in terms of basic social rights, and that's why I think the EU is really, really important. So it's going to be about engagement, because the media isn't going to actually help us. You know, the right-wing media is hell-bent on telling everybody what a waste of money the EU is, but actually it's our job to go out there and say, you know what, it's going to actually really hurt us if we leave the EU, and it's not as simple as everybody seems to think it is. I'm an internationalist, my parents were born in India and Africa, so I will always force the point that we are better and we are more united and stronger being part of Europe. And the other thing that's really important as well, and because you are the youngest in the room and I think it's fantastic that you're here, is about engaging younger people as well, because I think you guys are the ones that politicians generally just tend to ignore. We like to tell you what we want to do to you, but I'm not going to be working like that. I mean, I've been a Labour student, I was chair of my Labour club, I've been endorsed by both the two Labour-affiliated Labour clubs in the east of England as well. And what I will say is that I will constantly be having conversations with young people to make sure that I'm also representing your views out in Europe and not just my views and older people's views.
This is a two-way question, really. How much of a sort of flash in the pan do you think UKIP are? That's the first part of it. And whatever your views on that, whether they are a flash in the pan, how do you plan to persuade people that it's not such a good idea voting for them?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we agree on something. I always describe UKIP as the BNP in posh suits, and that's how I see them. They are homophobic, they are xenophobic, they're racist, they're nasty. And, you know, quite frankly, if I had my way, I wouldn't even give them a platform, but we live in a democracy and, you know, they do have a platform. I think the people that are voting UKIP now over BNP in the past are the people that actually they're concerned about things like housing, growth, jobs. And the first thing we need to do is talk to them about their concerns, you know, let them air their concerns. So in the past, I think the majority of main political parties have almost ignored the issue of immigration. It is a concern, and if people want to talk about it, I think let them talk about it, but you know, once they've aired it, we need to talk about the things that a Labour government and a Labour Party could actually do for them, which is bringing growth, build more housing, and more housing is starting to be built. You know, some of the Labour-controlled councils are building more council housing, which we desperately need. There are things going on in terms of how we are going to be protecting the NHS, how Europe will be good for trade, how things will get more expensive when we're not part of Europe. They're the things that we need to talk to them about. But I'm going to say this. Over the last few weeks, I've been thinking, you know, this question's been asked quite a lot. And I'm a little bit worried that all our focus is going on to UKIP, actually. Our real enemy in this region are the Tories. If we are going to get back into Westminster, we have to win seats off the Tories in 2015, which means that we have to persuade Tory voters also to vote for us next year in the European elections. Because if we constantly carry on focusing on UKIP, then there is a big danger that we won't win seats back for Labour in 2015, and then without a Labour government, then this country is back to square one. So I'm saying, UKIP, yes, tackle them, but let's not focus all our energies on them, and let's actually deal with our main opposition, which is the Nazi Tories.
I'd like to ask the three candidates, please. There is a great danger, which must be apparent to you as well as to me, that the EU is liable to split into the House and not middle of this. France and Germany, two of the founding members, and the rest. How do you see a bevy of Labour MPs, which we all hope for? How do you see a bevy of Labour MEPs counteracting, if that is the right word, but acting as a counterweight to the balance of Francois and Angela?
It may look like that the EU could potentially split into two, probably Northern Europe, the rich countries, and Southern Europe, the less rich countries. But I think we should also celebrate the fact that we've got another member joining very soon, Croatia. So the European Union is actually getting bigger, and I think it's in our interest to make sure it survives, all for the reasons of trade and treaties and the rights that we all have across Europe. But what it's going to mean is that the first thing we have to do is actually elect as many Labour MEPs as possible from the country. At the moment we've got a smattering, which then means that we've got a much smaller voice in Europe. So if we could double our representation in Europe, that's a good start. But having Labour MEPs isn't going to be just the way forward. At the same time, in 2015, we have to make sure that we elect a socialist government in this country as well and get Labour back into Westminster. Because with a Labour government in Westminster, with the Labour MEPs in Europe, we can actually start talking and representing the views of social justice and social democracy. Because at the moment, the Germans, with their right-wing government led by Angela Merkel, is the one that they're leading the way. So it's going to mean that in Europe we work with our sister parties in promoting values and promoting for a social Europe, and that's how I see that Labour MEPs actually have to do. And if we don't carry on making that voice forward, then what is the point? Because the whole point is that we actually support our poorer neighbours.
Alex has just come on to farming. Now, I listen to farming today quite regularly on the radio, and this morning I heard, for instance, that 40% of European spending is on the farming industry. There's a new Eastern European country about to join, I can't remember which one it is, and they have very small farms, probably about 5-6 acres. In actual fact, they do support families. But the actual government of this country that's going to join wants these small farms to disappear, and they will become, massive sort of 5, 6, 7, 800 acre farms. What do you think is the solution?
Farming Today, now that's a programme. And my campaign manager here will wonder why I quite like listening to Farming Today, and I like the shipping forecast, but I'm the daughter of a newsagent. I used to have to wake up every morning at 4:30 to do the paper round, so I have been listening to Farming Today since I was 8 years old.
You've got my vote.
And I heard that today as well. I think the country that you might be referring to is Croatia, actually. And yes, there are a lot of small holdings. I had a flatmate when I was living in London who came from Croatia, and her family did farm. And I think I'm not going to pretend and say that I know the answer, because I don't. It's not an area of expertise for me. But I think we do need to look at the common agricultural policy in the sense that we are paying subsidies to many landowners, including the Queen, which is absolutely ludicrous. And I would probably argue that some of these richer landowners don't need those subsidies, and that we use this money that's being spent on actually supporting the smaller holdings and family farms in some of the smaller, poorer countries of Europe, because that's obviously a livelihood for them. So that's actually how I would look to tackle it. But I'm going to put my hands up and say I'm not an expert by all means, and that would be something that I would actually have to go and learn a bit more about.
Thank you. Peter, then Heather. Oh, actually, we've only got, it's now 8:45.
We could take both.
Yeah,
and-
both.
Right, Peter, then Heather. That's
Okay. Where do the three of you stand on moving towards a more closely integrated federal Europe?
Heather.
Actually, mine is sort of almost linked with that. Do you ever feel there'll be a time when the UK should join the Euro, or are we better off staying well clear of it?
Anna.
I'm going to take this as that actually you're asking as what our views are. And I think in the long term, and I'm going to address both of you, I think moving towards a federal Europe is going to become inevitable. We are an island nation. We are a tiddly little nation as far as the world is concerned now. You know, we are not the largest economy by far. You know, what are we, 6th, going on towards 8th? And you know, the only way that all the European countries are going to be able to compete, possibly other than exception of Germany, is going to be by working together. I think a lot of the inefficiencies at the moment are created by having very separate jurisdictions in all the national governments, and I think that's what's causing a problem. And it's already been said that the BRIC nations, so places like Brazil, India, China, South Africa, Russia, you know, these are the big economies of the future, and the only way we are going to be able to trade with them is by working together, not apart. So I think a move towards a federal Europe is a good thing. I would say that it would bring about more tolerance, less waste, better understanding. You know, the United States works like that, and actually if you even look at India, it is federal states that are united, and look at how they're booming. So, and they are different peoples with different cultures and different nations, and it works in the United States, it works in India, and I think it's going to go that way as well for us. In terms of the EU, Heather, the Euro, I think we were right in not joining when we didn't, but I've always said that it's one of those questions that we should never say never. If the economic circumstances are right, and I think at some point they will be, and I think it will be because of the impact that it will have on future trade in terms of imports and exports. And if that means that, you know, it's in the best interest of this nation, I don't see why we shouldn't have the Euro. And for those people who are worried about losing the Queen's or the King's head by that time, you know what? Let them have that if that's what they want. So that's where I see it going.